Ah, yeah. I didn't go on the something.
Okay, so let's see where we left off last week. So we're at the section where we're looking at actually ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. And this has two subheadings. The first one is the type of rebirth that will stop samsara. And the second one is the type of the path that we need to meditate upon in order to stop samsara. So we were discussing the first of these two outlines. So this actually comes as the second outline under, the main practices of the individual that are practices that are shared with the individual of the middle scope. And the first section of that is generating the mind wishing for liberation. And in order to generate that wishes for liberation, we actually have to look at the nature of samsara. We have to meditate on suffering, the specific and the general types of suffering, until we understand that the nature of samsara is suffering. When we see that, we will want to escape or reverse, come out of samsara, and naturally we will start looking for the causes that establish samsara. So we see that there are two causes. There is karma and affliction, and from these two, the main one is afflictions. Afflictions are many, and if we really examine, we will see that it is the ignorance or confusion of self-grasping that is the main one, the head affliction that creates all these problems. Once we have this ignorance of self-grasping, we will be motivated by attachment and hatred, and through that we will accumulate negative karma, and this will perpetuate our existence within samsara. Therefore, if we think that we must abandon samsara, if we think that we must really reach the state of liberation, it becomes obvious that we have to address the causes. So it becomes obvious that if we want to obtain the state of liberation, we must abandon, we must eradicate this ignorance of self-grasping. Okay, so then the question is, what type of physical rebirth is optimum in order to do that thing? And the answer to that is that the precious human rebirth that we have right now is the best possible rebirth. If we didn't have this rebirth, if we had a rebirth in which we didn't have leisure, we didn't have freedom, it would have been very difficult. So optimum human rebirth is the best, and within that we see that there are two options, either the lay person or the ordained. The layperson has to spend quite a lot of time and energy chasing the livelihood, right? They have to engage in trade, they have to raise the family, they have to cultivate the fields, they have to do a lot of other jobs. Whilst the ordained abandon all these activities, and therefore they don't have these distractions, and they have less obstacles in establishing the Dharma. So the answer to which type of rebirth is the best is precious human rebirth, and in particular, ordained. Okay, so we have said that the precious human rebirth, and in particular the practice of being ordained, is optimum. And in many authoritative texts, it is emphasized that having the vows of ordination is the most excellent basis. It's the root of the teachings, because it's the best way to engage the Mahayana vehicle of the six perfections and also the tantric practices. And therefore, they should be, these vows of ordination should be treated with a lot of respect. Okay, so now if we have reached the conclusion that we want to abandon samsaric suffering and we want to reach liberation, it is important, as we say, to address its causes. And the causes of samsara are karma and affliction. And mainly we want to look at afflictions. How are we going to eliminate and deal with afflictions? To eliminate the afflictions, we must apply a powerful antidote that is actually a correct antidote. And this correct antidote is cultivated and provided through the three higher trainings. So with the three higher trainings, how we provide the antidote is that with the training of ethics, we abandon distraction. We avoid the mind being distracted to external objects. with the training of concentration, we balance the mind. The mind is internally imbalanced due to mental excitation and mental thinking. So what concentration does is to even this out, to balance this out. And then finally, the training of wisdom is the one that eradicates the root of all afflictions, the ignorance of self-grasping, and by eradicating this, it liberates a mind that is unliberated. Okay, so the three higher trainings provide antidote by means of making that which is distracted undistracted, making that which is unbalanced balanced, and making that which is unliberated liberated. So we have mentioned here the three higher trainings, and the thing with this is that there is a definite order in which we develop them. First of all, we develop the higher training in ethics, and then by relying on that, we develop the training in concentration, and by relying on that, we develop the training in wisdom. So in terms of this order, the first one is the training in ethics. If we have training in ethics, it means that we will have very good recollection and awareness of what is to be practiced and what is to be abandoned. And when we have clarity upon that, then it is easy for us to engage any other training. So the concentration will follow from that, and then the wisdom will also follow from that. In many texts, we have a reference of the importance of having ethics, and even it is said that if you wish to establish calm abiding, you need to have together the necessary causes that facilitate the development of calm abiding, and ethics, morality, is enumerated as one of them. So we can see that ethics is the basis. Okay, so we say here that if you actually have the wish to abandon the causes for samsara, and if you see that you have the capability of doing this, then it is important that you practice the three higher trainings earnestly. So one could say that the three higher trainings is the main training and the main thing that is presented as the practice of the individual of the middle scope. However, here we are presenting the practices that are shared with the individual of the middle scope, right? Not just the middle scope, but shared with the middle scope. So therefore, because this is the case, when we are presenting the paths that are shared with the individual of the middle scope, we emphasize that what you need to do in the middle scope is to generate genuine renunciation. And once you generate genuine renunciation, from there, you enter the training of the individual of the great scope. Now, within the presentation of the individual of the great scope, in the 6 perfections, we have elaborate presentation of concentration and wisdom, of calm abiding and special insight. Therefore, these 2 will be presented later. And that means that we are left here in the practices shared with the individual of the middle scope, only with the presentation of ethics from the 3 trainings. Okay, so we say here that the main thing we have to look at is the practice of ethics, of morality. The Buddha has taught this in the Vinaya Pitaka. The Vinaya is a very extensive subject. In the 3 great monasteries, it is a subject that is taught for 3 to 4 years, so quite extensively. Obviously, here we will only have a short reference to this. We will look at the benefits of properly keeping the vows, the shortcomings of not keeping them, and how to actually assume and keep them properly. Okay, so let's look at the benefits of maintaining ethics. There are 10 of those benefits. So the first one is that because you will abandon confused ethics and confused practices, at the time of the death, you will have no regrets. So by keeping morality, when you reach at the end of your life, you will not have regrets. The second one is that you will develop a good reputation and you will be renowned. Someone who is an ethical person person has a good reputation. The third one is that you will sleep easily. The fourth one is that the gods will protect you. So even when they are, humans or non-humans who are plotting against you, you will receive this type of protection. The next one is that you will have no fear and no terror because you will not have committed negativity. The next one is that beings who act to usually harm you, when they see that you keep proper ethics, they will not harm you. They will step back from causing problems from you. The next one is that humans and non-humans will not be able to interfere and cause harm to you. The next one is that food, clothes, and any other necessities that you need, you will be able to acquire them easily without much problem. And finally, that any prayers that you do will bear fruits because you will be keeping your morality. So these are the 10 benefits. So we have different quotations that actually mention the great importance of ethics. So it says that ethics is like the steps of the ladders that lead to all virtue. Ethics is like the root of the tree because all virtues grow out of ethics. Ethics is like the leading businessman that walks ahead of all the other tradesmen. So it indicates that ethics is the one that comes first and all the other virtues follow after that. And ethics is the one that closes all the paths leading to negativity and protects you. Ethics is like the medicine to the illness of all negativity. Also, we have a quotation from Master Nagarjuna where it says, both animate and inanimate are supported by earth. So ethics were said to be the foundation of all virtue. So we see ethics is like the basis and the foundation from where all good qualities develop. Now, the next thing to look is the shortcomings that come from not keeping your ethics properly. So the first shortcoming is that the teachings decline. You're not upholding properly the teachings. You come to harm your own self. You lose the protection from the deities. Everybody else arises as an enemy to you because you're harming other people. Teachings that you have already received, you will not be able to remember them or put them properly into practice. Teachings that you have not received, you will not able to receive them easily. Past realizations that you have developed, you will not be able to develop any further, but instead they will decline. You will reach the time of death with great regret, and after death, you will take a rebirth in the lower migrations. So a list of shortcomings. So the Buddha himself has actually spoken about the importance of discipline. From the sutra delivered to the monks, we have a quotation where it says, for some, ethics means happiness. For some, ethics means suffering. Those who keep their ethics will be happy. Those with loose ethics will suffer. So if you have taken vows and you keep them properly, that results in happiness. But if you transgress your morality or the vows, this will result in suffering. Also, in the Sutra of Having Pure Ethics, the Buddha has said that it is preferable to lose this life than to lose your vows. And this is explained on the basis that if you lose this life, you only lose something which is limited. But if you lose your vows, you create suffering that might last for hundreds of eons in future rebirths. So that passage from the Sutra of Having Pure Ethics says, monks, it is easy to give up your life and die, but not so for the decline or destruction of your ethics. Why so? If you give up your life and die, then this life of yours comes to an end. But owing to the decline or destruction of your ethics, you give up happiness for tens of millions of eons, lose caste, and experience a great downfall. So, as you can see, it's very important to keep morality properly. Okay, so we come now to the third heading in this section, which is the different types of vows that we can take. And we have three types of vows. We have vows for 24 hours, we have vows for the duration of the life, and we have vows till we reach the essence of enlightenment. So to give you an example of those, the vows of 24 hours usually are the vows that we take just for a day. You take them like at the dawn or early in the morning, and you have them until the next day. Okay, the Nenyen vows. The second category, which are vows for life, they can be the lay vows for the whole life, Getsul vows, and Gelong vows. These are for the duration of life. And finally, we have vows that we take. Usually it's a ceremony, and you say from today onwards until I reach the essence of enlightenment. And this refers to the Bodhisattva vows and the Tantric vows. Okay, so let's look at the first category, which are called one-day vows. The actual term means vows that allow you to abide closely. Abide closely means you come near to something, you come close to something. And what you come close to are vows are the state of liberation. So by taking these one-day vows, you're coming close to liberation. So there are different categories of these vows. There are 6 divisions, so you can take 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of all of them. Okay, so we say that we have 6 types or 6 categories within the one-day vows. So when we look at the one-day vows, the one-day vows is a group of vows. 4 of them are called the 4 root vows. And then in addition to that, we have the 5th one, which is abandoning alcohol. So the first category, if you look at the root of the 4 vows, if you're only able to maintain one of them, you're called someone who has 1 vow. The second category is someone who can hold 2 out of the 4 root vows. The third category is someone who can hold 3 out of the 4. And if you can hold 3 out of the 4, it is said holding the majority or holding most of the vows. Okay, the next step is to hold the 4 root vows plus the vow for abandoning alcohol. So you have 5. If you have 5, it is said holding the full set of vows. Now, we have the 6th one, because in addition to that, you might give up also sexual activity. So if you have this, then you have vows of purity or vows of chastity. Okay, so this is called the refuge vow. Okay, so as we said here, we have 6 possibilities, and it is said that only the last 2 categories are considered to be the fully qualified one-day vows. So either you have the 4 root plus abandoning alcohol, which is the whole group of 5, or you have 5 plus abandoning sexual activity. So these 2 are considered to be the genuine one-day vows, and the previous 4 are considered to be just imputed one-day vows. Okay, so we mentioned here the one-day vows, and these one-day vows consisting of the 4 root ones plus abandoning alcohol, and then it can be the addition of abandoning sexual activity, are suitable vows for lay people, right? So here we're talking about abandoning stealing, abandoning killing, abandoning lying, abandoning drinking alcohol, and abandoning sexual activity as an additional possibility. Then if we look at further vows, the other vows that we have are vows of ordination, the Gelong and the Getsul, and obviously these are not for the lay people. So there's a special mention here of drinking alcohol, and there is the advice that we should try to abandon this. For the lay people, either to at least try to eliminate the consumption of alcohol, or completely try to abandon it. For the ordained, it is not allowed at all to drink any alcohol. The reason for that is because drinking of alcohol brings about a lot of shortcomings. So Geshe was reading a quotation from the sutra from the Buddha, who said that actually drinking alcohol brings about a natural deterioration of any virtue activity or quality that you have within your mind stream. Your mind becomes unhappy and unstable, distracted and confused, and that becomes a big obstacle to practicing Dharma. Everything, your life turns for the worse, and it is similar to drinking poison, because due to drinking alcohol, you will generate anger, you will generate attachment and confusion. And therefore, this makes everything much worse. So very strong advice for abandoning alcohol. So from the vows that we take for the duration of the life, we have already explained the lay vows, the Genyen vows. Following that, we have the Getsul and the Gelong. So these are vows for ordination. And obviously, since here the audience is mostly lay people, it is not appropriate to elaborate about the vows of the ordained or disclose too much about it. So very briefly, just mentioning that these are vows for life. The Getsul, which is the novice ordination, includes taking 36 vows, whilst the Gelong, which is the full ordination, includes taking 253 vows. So from the 36 vows of the Getsul, 18 are considered to be, there are classifications of those, different groups of those in 4 and 18 and so forth. But anyway, just keep in mind there are a large number of vows that kept for life. Okay, so we live at a time where that is described as the time of the 5 degenerations in terms of the teachings. And it is said that during that time, it is very beneficial, even if you are able to practice, to do one practice, even just for one day. So it is said compared to, okay, so there's a quotation here from the King of Concentration, the Sutra of the King of Concentration, where it says, compared to someone who makes very extensive offerings of parasols and umbrellas and all types of offerings to the Buddhas for a very long time, during the time where there is no degeneration, of course, the merit they will create is great, but compared to that, the merit and the importance that there is of keeping the vows even for one day at the time of degeneration, the merit is even greater. And that is a great incentive also for the lay people to keep the vows just for one day. The third category of vows that we have are vows that are taken until we reach the essence of enlightenment. So in that, as we say, we have bodhisattva vows and tantric vows. Bodhisattva vows will be explained in the training of the individual of the great vehicle, so we will not elaborate on that. And then also for the tantric vows, we will not discuss them here in this class. Okay, so we talk about practicing the first one, the practicing ethics or practicing morality, and there is a question of how do we actually practice it. So the first thing is that you should be able to maintain the vows that you have taken, and it is said that there are 4 doors that allow for the vows to be broken or decline. If you can close those 4 doors, it means there will be no deterioration of your vows. You will protect the vows. So the first door is the door of ignorance. The second door is the door of carelessness. The third one is the door of disrespect. And the fourth one is the door of many afflictions. Okay, so we said that the first gate that can allow breakage of the vows is ignorance. So really, if you don't know what your vows are, or if you don't know what the spirit of the vows are, it is quite likely that you will break the vow. And in order to overcome this, we need to go and listen to the teachings, receive advice, receive teachings, so that we can become educated about what the vows are. Once you understand what is involved with your vows, you are much less likely to break them. So as we say here in the monasteries, the discipline or Vinaya is a very big subject. It is taught for 3 to 4 years, and we have the actual Vinaya texts and then many commentaries to them. And in particular, there is the training in Vinaya, and the Dalai Lama's Gendun troops takes the precious garland of advice on the vows. The second door that we have to close is the door of carelessness, because carelessness or recklessness is actually the most dangerous attitude of them all. And in order to do this, we have to apply different means. So first of all, we have to be very mindful. So being mindful here, it means that we need to be reminded. Okay, so as we say, the first thing that we have to overcome is ignorance, and we overcome ignorance by studying and understanding what the vows are about. But it's not enough to study it or understand it once. You need, subsequent to that, you need to go with and rely upon a really qualified teacher who will actually give you advice and commentary about your vows, right? So basically that teacher will explain to you, this is what you need to adopt, this is what you need to practice. Remember, you have this vow, this is what it means to have this vow. So by having this advice, it helps you it helps you remember, it helps you not to forget the vows that you have, and therefore you cultivate mindfulness. Mindfulness means you will not forget it, so you will go and seek that instruction that will support your mindfulness. The second thing that we need to have is vigilance. Vigilance means that we need to constantly examine every activity that we do. You eat something, you drink something, you're sitting down, you're rising up, you're walking around, you're laying down, or you engage in any other type of activity. You need to have an aspect of your mind always checking, always examining. What am I doing? Is this appropriate? Is this inappropriate? So constantly checking with vigilance. The third aspect that we need to have is the aspect of shame. So shame is the one that will help you, is the aspect that helps you avoid negativity, thinking about yourself. So for example, you would say, oh, I'm a fully ordained monk, I'm a Gelong, how could I possibly do that? And by reminding yourself who you are, you have that sense of shame. Also, you should have a sense of embarrassment, which is consideration for others. And you say, if I do that, what will others do? Others think, it harms others. Others will criticize me. And finally, you should have trepidation, meaning you should be very afraid of the negative results, the suffering that will come from breaking the vows. So by combination of mindfulness, vigilance, shame, embarrassment, and trepidation, you will close the door of carelessness. The third door that we need to close is the door of disrespect. And we do that by generating respect for the teacher, respect for the proclamation, so the rules that the teacher has given, and respect for fellow practitioners, who are those who follow the precepts set by the Buddha. So it is said that in the future, it will be very hard to actually find someone keeping properly the vows of individual liberation. It will become even very rare to hear the name of the Buddha. And for that reason, it is very important right now to show great respect for the teacher, the rules of the teacher, and the followers of those rules. The third door, or the fourth door that we need to close is the door of the predominant affliction. Okay, so we need to identify which type of affliction is the most threatening for us or the most predominant in terms of keeping the vows. So, for example, if the biggest problem that you have comes from attachment, it is important that you rely on an antidote that addresses mainly attachment. So you need to meditate on ugliness. If the main problem that you have is with hatred, you need to meditate to develop love. If the main problem that you have is confusion, then it is very good to meditate on the 12 links. That is the whole system of afflicted and purified phenomena, and to examine the two stages of entering within samsara and exiting within samsara. So that will remove a bit of confusion. If you have a lot of pride, it is very good to contemplate the suffering of sickness, of aging, of death, the suffering that comes from meeting with the unpleasant, or the suffering that comes from being separated from the pleasant. So a few of those subjects were discussed when we were talking about the specific sufferings, so general and specific sufferings within samsara. So they're very good to eliminate pride. And finally, if your main problem is doubt, it is very good to meditate on the four truths, on the law of cause and effect, on the objects of refuge, and so forth. So whatever is your most predominant affliction, apply the appropriate antidote to reduce it as much as possible. So the antidotes that we have mentioned here are specific antidotes that only work at the level of manifest afflictions. However, if you're looking for one antidote that is the common antidote, or that can act as the antidote for every type of affliction, then that antidote has to be emptiness. So what we mean by this is that, for example, when you meditate on ugliness, ugliness is a specific antidote that will only deal with manifest attachment. But meditating on ugliness will do nothing to work on your hatred or your pride and so forth. So it's a very specific antidote for a specific occasion. However, if you meditate on emptiness, which is the lack of inherent existence, that has the power to address all afflictions from the root. And this is why the texts that directly explicitly teach emptiness, such as the Heart Sutra or the Prajna Paramitas, are considered to be extremely precious texts, because they give us exactly that universal or all applying to every occasion antidote. So it is very important to understand what is the predominant affliction that endangers us, and to be able to recognize what is the focal aspect and what is the appearing aspect of these afflictions. Once you become familiar with those things, then it means that you will be able to recognize them straight away as soon as they are generated in your mind, and apply the antidote. Because failing to do that, it means actually you're losing the battle. You're not even engaging in the battle with afflictions. As the Gadampa Geshes used to say, the most important job that we have to do is to fight the enemy of afflictions that exist within our own mind. If we do not apply the antidote, and then it means that our ethics are not pure. If we don't have pure ethics, it means we will not even be trying to suppress these afflictions. And by lacking the ethics, by lacking the morality, that means we will not be able to generate any concentration or any wisdom. Because if you lack the ethics, you lack the foundation. Therefore, it is very important to be very familiar with the aspect of afflictions, and immediately recognize it as soon as it arises in your mind, and apply whatever antidote you're capable of applying. So when we talk about here maintaining the ethics, it is very important to rely upon mindfulness and vigilance. So vigilance here has this aspect of introspection, and it is what the old Kadampa lamas used to do. They say, I always keep guard at the gate of my mind, meaning I'm always looking for the affliction, and as soon as it arises, you must apply the antidote. If you are not capable of applying the antidote, then it says you should make petitions and ask the help of your Lama, or recite some mantras, or even change the location, the place where you are, move somewhere else, or it says even turn your head the other way, meaning that perhaps, you're facing the wrong direction, turn and look the other way, it might be helpful. So by any means, try to be mindful and vigilant and apply some sort of means, some sort of antidote. Even if you're not capable of applying a fully qualified antidote, you should do however much you can. Because the alternative to that is that you allow the afflictions to just arise, proliferate, increase within your mind. It's like whatever comes, comes, whatever happens, happens. I'm not going to do anything. Let them roam freely into my mind. And if you allow this to happen, afflictions will only gain more and more strength. They will gain the upper hand, and then definitely they will undermine your practice of ethics. It means they will undermine the basis for you to develop any concentration, any wisdom, any insight, and so forth. So it's very important for both lay and ordained to apply on mindfulness and vigilance. So we had advice here of how important it is to maintain the training of ethics properly. And we say that it is very useful to close the 4 doors that endanger our morality. The first door is the door of ignorance, and we close that door by going and listening or educating yourselves about the vows. The second one is the door of carelessness, and the door of carelessness is closed if we develop mindfulness, go and receive teachings and advice, relying on vigilance, having a sense of shame, having a sense of embarrassment and trepidation. So closing the second door of carelessness. The third door is the door of disrespect, and in order to close this, we need to develop a respectful attitude towards the teacher, the rules of the teacher, and those who follow them. And finally, the fourth door is the door of the predominant affliction, and in order to close this, we need to identify which affliction is most putting us in the most difficult situation, and choose the right antidote in order to suppress this affliction. And it is said that for us beginners, the practice of morality, so the training in morality, is a practice that actually we can undertake. It's something which is within our reach. The other 2 trainings, the training in concentration and training of wisdom, are more advanced trainings. And as we said, these 2 subjects will be explained later in the context of the practice of the individual of the great scope. Okay, so we can see here that we can summarize those practices that are shared with the individual of the middle scope. So there is the basic practice that we do, and then we want to see what is the reason for doing those practices. The reason for doing these practices is to generate a mind that is very disappointed with the entire of samsara. And by doing this, we generate genuine renunciation. With that intense renunciation that is seeking to reach the state of liberation, then the next thing that we do is we generate the wish to practice towards Buddhahood. So you can see we have the basic practice. The practice is done for the purpose of generating genuine renunciation, and having generated that genuine renunciation, we then aspire to engage the next thing, which is the ultimate goal, practice to reach enlightenment. Okay, so to summarize, we have to think like this. We have obtained this life, which is life of precious human rebirth. We're very fortunate because we have met with the qualified teacher. And in addition to that, we are very fortunate because we have met with the best teachings, such as these teachings of Lamrim, the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa. And when we have all these conditions together, which are excellent conditions, we should not waste this opportunity. So since we have met such a qualified teacher, it is very important that we properly rely upon him in terms of thought and action. And whatever instructions we hear about the training of the individual of the small scope, those things we have to study and then we have to reflect. However, study and reflection is not enough. If you really want to transform and change your mind, you really have to meditate on those things. It means you really have to put them into practice. Without practicing, there will be no change. The reason why we want to practice those things and bring about the change in the mind is because we want to generate that attitude of being totally disenchanted and very disappointed with the whole of samsara. And by doing this, we generate renunciation and we generate this thought, this aspiration that we're looking for liberation. So when this genuine renunciation is generated, we enter the path to liberation. And from that point onwards, what is necessary is to generate the mind of bodhicitta and develop that wish that says, I want to reach the state of enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. Okay, so then we go back into our text, the easy path. We are halfway, page 19. We just have a few paragraphs. So we are on the halfway, page 19, on the actual practice. So while meditating on the Guru Yidam on the top of your head, contemplate as follows. Consciousness itself is neutral. Furthermore, firstly, the mind which thinks I and mine and which apprehends this as inherently existent arises. As a result of having apprehended this as inherently existent, mistaken minds such as attachment for one's party, aversion towards the other's party, pride, conceiving oneself as superior to others, and so forth arise. Consequently, doubts and mistaken views regarding the teacher who teaches selflessness and what is taught, such as the law of causality and the Four Noble Truths, as well as denying the existence of the three jewels and so forth, are generated. Due to that, all other afflictions increase. So as you can see here, it's going through the process of generating afflictions. So it begins by saying that consciousness or the mind is neutral. The mind is just clear and knowing. From its own side, it is neutral. However, it can be affected by incidental or adventitious defilements, all these afflictions, right? So first of all, we generate this sense of I and mine, and starting to grasp at this, we develop this idea of my group and their group, us and them. And then due to that division that we create, we generate attachment towards one group, hatred towards the other, and so on and so forth. So there's the attachment, the hatred, the pride, and so on, and all the other afflictions are generated. Okay, so due to that, all the other afflictions increase. Because of that, karma is accumulated so that unwillingly one has the experience various types of suffering in samsara. Therefore, since the root of all these types of suffering is in final analysis ignorance, I will try to attain in every way possible the state of Guru Buddha that is free from the roots of all samsaric sufferings. For this purpose, I will practice correctly the path, the precious three trainings. In particular, I will observe correctly, even at the cost of my life, any kind of morality I have vowed to, without letting it degenerate, since there is great benefit when one protects it and great disadvantages when one does not protect it. Moreover, since the cause for transgressing the vows is lack of knowledge, as its antidote, I will study and get to know the precepts. Since the lack of respect is the cause for transgressing the vows, as its antidote, I will cultivate respect towards the teacher, the prescribed vows taught by him, the companions who share those vows and who train correctly. Since the cause for transgressing the vows is lack of conscientiousness, as its antidote, I will be conscientious after having generated mindfulness, introspection, shame, and embarrassment. Since abundance of afflictions is the cause for transgressing the vows, I will meditate on ugliness as the antidote to attachment, on love as the antidote to aversion, and on dependent origination as the antidote to ignorance. Thus, I will train correctly in the pure vows that are not sullied by any infractions. I beseech you, Supreme Guru Yidam, bless us so that we can practice this way. Due to this fervent request, from the body of the Guru Yidam at the crown of your head descends nectar together with 5 colors light, which enter into you as well as in all Mother Sentient beings' bodies and minds. It purifies what hinders this realization. In particular, imagine that the special realization of these topics is generated in all of our minds. So as you can see, this passage here summarizes all the points we have been talking about. Okay, then the next one, the way to practice the conclusion is as before. So as before means when you come to the conclusion of this practice, you have to do the prayers and the dedication. The next one, regarding how to practice during the intervals between sessions, as mentioned above, one should study commentaries expounding the vows according to individual liberation. So if you are a lay person and you have lay vows, during the break in between sessions, you should be reading books and commentaries that refer or explain to those vows. If you have Gelon ordination, you should be looking at commentaries and texts that comment upon this class of vows. If you have Getsul ordination, you should be looking at commentaries that talk about how to properly keep the Getsul vows. If you have Bodhisattva vows, you read about the Bodhisattva vows. If you have Tantric vows, you read commentaries on the Tantric vows. This is the most beneficial. So as we say, whatever you meditate on the actual session, you have to follow up and continue in that line in between session instead of ruin the in between session by reading other material, doing other things. Okay, so as you can see here, following the easy path, we have come to the conclusion of the second main outline, which is the training that is shared with the individual of the small scope. So as we said, we are going to summarize this material by looking at the foundation of all good qualities. We did that with the training of the individual of the small scope, and we will do it now here for the middle scope as well. So for the training of the individual that is shared with the individual of the small scope, we had the first 4 verses. And now for the training that is shared with the individual of the middle scope, we only have 2 verses. Now remember that the material that in this context is presented under 2 main outlines. The first outline is how we generate the mind that seeks to attain liberation, and the second one is ascertaining the nature of the path that leads to that liberation. And for the first one, how we generate the mind that seeks to obtain liberation, we say that we need to meditate on the nature of samsara, to understand that the nature of samsara is suffering, and that since beginningless time we have been experiencing this suffering, and if we don't do anything about it, we will continue within samsara and we'll have to undergo even more suffering. Okay, so if we go into the foundation of all excellence, go into verse number 5, it says, when indulged in, samsaric pleasures cause dissatisfaction and induce suffering. Having understood their drawbacks and their unreliability, bless me that I may strongly aspire to liberation's bliss. So this is how to generate the mind that is seeking liberation. The next verse, number 6, with great watchfulness, conscientiousness, and remembrance drawn from that pure aspiration, bless me to make the vow of personal liberation the core of my practice, for they are the very root of the teaching. So this is ascertaining the nature of the path that leads to liberation. Okay, so let's look at this. Verse 5, we say that verse 5 is the one that refers to generating the mind that is seeking for liberation. So it begins by saying, when indulged in, samsaric pleasures cause dissatisfaction and induce suffering. So it's talking here about samsaric experiences, samsaric pleasures. These are the type of pleasures that it doesn't matter how much we enjoy them, it doesn't matter how much we have access to them, they actually do not satisfy us. They act in exactly the opposite way. Instead of satisfying our desire, they increase our desire. So it is very much like consuming salty water. So if you're thirsty, you want to drink clean water, and if you drink clean water, that will quench and satisfy your thirst. But if you add the salt in your water and you drink that water, instead of satisfying you, it makes you even more thirsty. So it says samsaric pleasures have exactly this element of increasing your dissatisfaction, making you want more and more desire, and therefore they induce suffering. Having understood the drawbacks and their unreliability, bless me that I may strongly aspire the liberation's bliss. So with the second part of the verse, we consider all the suffering and the drawbacks of samsara, the general one and the specifics. And basically the fact that whatever situation, no matter how magnificent it is in samsara, you cannot really rely upon it. There is no stability. So there's no reliance about your wealth. There's no reliance upon your friends or relatives, no matter how good friends they are. They're just unreliable. Okay, so considering the general and specific drawbacks of samsara, you generate the mind that is seeking liberation. As you can see with the last line, it says, bless me that I may strongly aspire to liberation's bliss. And this line we repeat twice. The first time when we repeat it, we actually think that we have strongly generated the mind that wishes to be liberated from samsara, because we do a very quick revising meditation. And at the end of that revising meditation, the purifying nectars descend from the Guru. With the second repetition, we see that a replica of the Guru comes and dissolves within us. And at the end of that, we think, I have generated this realization. Okay, so we come to the next verse, verse number 6. As we say, this verse corresponds to ascertaining the nature of the path that leads to liberation. It says, with great watchfulness, conscientiousness, and remembrance drawn from that pure aspiration, bless me to make the vows of personal liberation the core of my practice, for they are the very root of the teaching. So in the second line in the English translation, it says, drawn from that pure aspiration. The pure aspiration refers to renunciation. So having generated renunciation, due to that renunciation, so because we are sincerely wishing to be liberated from samsara, I will apply great watchfulness, conscientiousness, and remembrance. So I would be, the word great here emphasizes that I will really be vigilant. I will really have conscientiousness. I would really have mindfulness and so forth. And it says, for this way, I want to be blessed, you bless me to make the vows of personal liberation the core of my practice. So here we recognize that the training in morality in the form of the vows of personal liberation, the pratimoksha vows, is the basis of all other trainings. And it is the best practice that we beginners should be doing. The training of concentration and the training of wisdom relies upon the training of morality. So it says here, bless me to take that vows of individual liberations as the core of the teachings, the basic of the teachings. All right, so as we did before, the line that says, bless me to practice in this way, having understood this, bless me to practice in this way, is repeated 2 times. The first time you do the quick revision meditation on this subject and you visualize the descending water. With the second repetition, you see a replica of the Guru dissolving into you and you think that you have generated exactly that realization. Okay, so as you can see here, we have finished with verse 6. The next verse that says, having seen that, like myself, all beings my mothers, and so forth, is beginning with the material that is relevant to the path of the individual of the great scope. And we will do this, we revise those verses once we cover the material. So as you can see here, following the easy path, we have finished 2 major outlines, which is the training in the paths that are shared with the individual of the small scope and the individual of the middle scope. Okay, so that was a kind of like concise presentation of these 2 levels of training. Okay, so we will continue next week, starting obviously with the individual of the training, or with the training of the individual of the great scope. And someone had requested teachings on the 5 preliminaries. So Geshe says, I will try to include and incorporate teachings on refuge, on prostrations, on the mandalas, and so forth, just to get that starting, all right? So, okay, that's it for tonight, and thank you everyone for attending. Okay, so the important thing is, having done this presentation, we have given you a seed of this, the training of the individual, of the small scope and the middle scope and so forth. The important thing is not to leave it just at hearing and listening this information, but to put it into practice from your own side so that you can see some change. That's the most important thing from these teachings.